In a recent interview with Joe Rogan, Mel Gibson issued an eerie warning about playing Jesus in The Passion of the Christ, sharing the truth about Jim Caviezel and the impact of that film. Joe Rogan surprisingly admitted the price Christians pay in Hollywood. Hollywood is glamorous, ruthless, and full of secrets, but something unexpected happened when Rogan sat down to talk about Gibson and Caviezel. He admitted a shocking truth. Being a Christian in Hollywood isn't just frowned upon, it can cost you everything from roles to reputation. Faith often comes at a steep price. Joe Rogan said, "I found it fascinating to read and hear Jim talk about his experience." Mel Gibson responded, "It really changed the course of his entire life. It was fascinating to watch him work, actually. Most of the time I would walk away because he was doing something I never saw others do." Rogan then stated that the film must have had a profound impact on many people, as it wasn't just a movie, but something that strengthened people's faith. The global success of The Passion of the Christ was enormous, but many, especially in Hollywood, dismissed the idea of such a film. Mel Gibson's film wasn't just a movie, it was a worldwide phenomenon. However, behind the cameras, strange and even frightening events happened, and at the center of it all was a terrifying warning that would forever change the lives of those involved. What did Mel Gibson see during production? What warning did he give about playing Jesus? And how did it affect the actor who brought Christ to life? Stick around, because this story will surprise you and perhaps even inspire you. Back in the 2000s, making a biblical film wasn't exactly a popular idea in Hollywood. Mel Gibson wanted to tell the story of Jesus' crucifixion with raw honesty, but studio after studio rejected his proposal. Some executives believed a film about Jesus wouldn't be successful, while others feared the controversy that could arise from such a bold project. But Mel didn't give up. He decided to finance the film himself, risking millions of his own resources. And you know what's even more impressive? When Mel Gibson entered Hollywood, he had no idea how much it would change his life forever. Imagine a small-town boy from Australia, who a few years prior didn't even know if he could be an actor, now at the center of the world's biggest film industry. We've never seen a star reveal such profound truths about the industry. After his success, Mel found himself dealing with something much deeper. The glamour of Hollywood often felt overwhelming, even alienating to him. Mel Gibson described his early days in Hollywood as a mix of awe and paranoia. He said it was like being thrown into a different world where everyone already knew the rules, but no one bothered to explain them to him. However, that wasn't all. As his career took off, the darker sides of Hollywood began to reveal themselves. While the world celebrated his talent, Mel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about the industry. Even so, for now, he was riding the wave of success, leaving a trail of iconic films that would stand the test of time. Hollywood may seem glamorous at first glance, but behind the cameras, it's a machine driven by one thing: money. For Mel Gibson, this reality hit hard when he transitioned from actor to filmmaker. He quickly realized that telling stories wasn't the only priority in that place. It all came down to profit. Mel discovered that the studio system wasn't just about making movies, but about relationships. Deals were made behind closed doors, loyalties were tested, and trust was often a fleeting concept. He described moments where he felt betrayed by people he thought were allies. This ability to let go of resentment became a survival skill in Hollywood. Mel learned to see the industry for what it really was, a place where everyone was looking out for their own interests. He realized that even the most well-intentioned people could make decisions that harmed others, often without malice. "It's not personal," he explained. "They don't really want to hurt you, it's just the way the system works." When Mel Gibson was already firmly established as a big name in Hollywood, he had also become painfully aware of its darker side. Behind the bright lights and thunderous applause, there was a world of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. The industry was full of people who would praise you one moment and sabotage you the next, all in the name of advancing their own interests. For Mel, this wasn't just a harsh reality, but a personal challenge to overcome. He compared Hollywood to a bizarre, almost surreal town, where nothing seemed as it really was. "It's like walking into a room where everyone knows something you don't," he said. "It's like those old movies where the stranger comes to town and everyone stops talking when he walks into the bar." This feeling of alienation was something Mel felt deeply when he arrived in Hollywood. Sometimes he even questioned his own sanity, wondering if he was just imagining the dark forces at play. But as his career progressed, he began to realize that his suspicions were not unfounded. "Some of my worst nightmares turned out to be real," he admitted. "This place will humble you, but it can also humble you in a way that makes you grow," he said. "It's always hitting the walls, trying to knock you down. But those walls are your own." Mel Gibson is no stranger to controversy. He faced opposition when he brought Jesus' last hours to the big screen. Wherever he went, he kept facing resistance. Mel Gibson said it all started with a question: what really happened during Jesus' last hours of life? This question haunted him. It wasn't just an idea for a film, it became a calling he couldn't ignore. He wanted to show the world the pain, the sacrifice, the reality, but as we'll see, not everyone was ready for the truth. Mel knew this project would be a hard sell. Hollywood wasn't interested in his vision. They wanted safe, predictable stories, and a raw, realistic depiction of Jesus didn't fit the mold. Mel said, "I thought others had told this story before, but never like this. I wanted to dig deep, show the suffering, and highlight the true cost of sacrifice." But instead of support, he faced rejection after rejection. It was then that he found his leading actor, Jim. Mel saw something in Jim, a quality that set him apart. He once said, "Jim emptied himself and let Christ in." But that role would take Jim on a journey he never expected. Jim was one of Hollywood's biggest stars in the early 2000s. He starred in blockbuster films that typically grossed over $90 million, such as The Thin Red Line and The Count of Monte Cristo. But suddenly, that disappeared. How was this possible? Although it seemed like he was on the path to a long and successful career, something changed after he took on one unforgettable role, and many of us know what that role is. Want to know what's crazier? Mel Gibson warned him. When Jim was offered the role of Jesus Christ in The Passion of the Christ, it wasn't a decision to be taken lightly. Mel Gibson, the film's director, knew this better than anyone. Before Jim accepted, Gibson called him for a serious conversation. He didn't mince words. He told Jim, "If you take this role, you'll never work in this town again." This wasn't a casual warning. Gibson was fully aware of the controversy surrounding the film, even before it was released. He knew that playing such a significant and polarizing figure could put Jim in the firing line of Hollywood criticism and public scrutiny. Many actors might have hesitated or even given up after hearing something like that, but Jim's response was immediate and firm. He later recalled the words he said to Gibson, "We all have to embrace our crosses." For Jim, this wasn't just a career decision, it was a calling. He deeply believed in the message of the story and felt that this role wasn't something he could refuse, no matter the cost. Taking on the role of Jesus wasn't just acting for Jim, it was a matter of faith, conviction, and a willingness to sacrifice his Hollywood reputation for something greater. He once said, "We have to give up our names, our reputations, our lives to speak the truth." These words capture the heart of his decision. Mel Gibson's prediction was not far from reality. After the release of The Passion of the Christ, the film became a cultural phenomenon, but also a magnet for controversy. While the film's supporters praised its boldness and faithfulness to the story of Christ, critics accused it of being too graphic and divisive for Jim. The consequences of his choice were almost immediate. Hollywood turned its back on him, and many filmmakers who had previously seen him as a rising star now considered him too risky to cast. But Jim didn't regret his decision. Instead, he leaned into his faith, fully embracing the role and its impact on his life. After The Passion of the Christ hit theaters in 2004, the film became one of the most talked about in the world. It exceeded all expectations, grossing over $600 million worldwide on a modest budget, and was praised by many for the raw and faithful way it portrayed Jesus' last hours of life. But for Jim, who delivered a powerful and deeply emotional performance, the story wasn't as simple as critical acclaim or box office numbers. The film not only divided the audience, but also Hollywood. While many fans celebrated his portrayal of Christ, the industry's reaction wasn't as warm. Some within the industry labeled the film as too controversial, polarizing, and by association, Jim became a controversial figure as well. One thing became clear: Jim was no longer seen the same way in Hollywood. After The Passion, calls from major studios dwindled, and he found himself on the sidelines, watching from the outside. He later reflected on it, saying that he didn't care about the change. He was willing to sacrifice his career to be part of the story. In his own words, Jesus is as controversial now as he ever was. It hasn't changed much in 2,000 years. He understood that playing Christ meant he might never do another big role in Hollywood, but for him, it was worth it. While The Passion of the Christ brought him closer to his faith, it also took him away from the traditional Hollywood path. Mel Gibson said that Jim did something special. Gibson stated, "He did something that I don't think anyone else has ever done, and I think he achieved it because I really believed. I believed it too, and it was like, what did he do? He emptied himself, and he invited something else in, and he let it happen. He just didn't try anything. He emptied himself and meditated and let Christ in. And that role seems to have had a profound effect on him, and it did, as a human being. Now imagine yourself standing on a hill, surrounded by 350 people, the wind howling, the sky heavy with clouds. You feel the earth moving beneath your feet. Suddenly the wind stops. You can't hear it. Time seems to slow down. Then you leave your body, looking at yourself from above. How is this possible? This was Jim's experience while filming one of the most intense moments of the Passion of the Christ. Although many have watched the film, few realize the extreme pain the actor faced. Going through the filming of the crucifixion scene was no ordinary moment for Jim. Imagine being lifted onto a cross, exposed to the elements for hours on end. For Jim, each moment was physically exhausting and spiritually overwhelming. The day itself felt surreal. The wind was howling, making it difficult to hear anything clearly. The clouds were dark and heavy, hanging low in the sky, as if the heavens themselves were watching. Jim described the sensation as something supernatural, as if the earth was alive beneath him, groaning and trembling. It wasn't just the physical conditions that made the scene difficult, but also what Jim carried in his heart. He wasn't just playing a role. He knew he was stepping into something much deeper, something sacred. The wind was strong, he recalled. The clouds were so close that it felt like I could jump and touch them. The ground, you could feel something in it, almost like it was alive. As the crew prepared for the scene, there was a sense of unease among them. The extras, the camera operators, the directors, they all seemed to feel it. People whispered among themselves about how strange the atmosphere was. It wasn't just acting, it felt real. He shared how the wind suddenly became so strong that it almost knocked people over. But in the midst of all that chaos, Jim found himself immersed in a deep tranquility. The wind, the noise, even the murmurs of people all seemed to have stopped. Then something changed. Jim described how time seemed to slow down. I couldn't hear the wind anymore, he said. Everything went quiet. What happened next was something that no one on set could explain. What Jim experienced there would stay with him forever. Suspended on the cross, surrounded by hundreds of people on set, something extraordinary happened. He described it in his own words. I left my body. I saw the back of myself for a few seconds, seconds that felt much longer. Jim found himself outside his body. He was no longer just acting, nor was he just a man playing Jesus. It was as if his soul had moved away, giving him a new perspective from above. He could see himself there hanging, just as Jesus did centuries ago. He could also see the crowd, the extras, the crew, all moving around the set. But what impressed him most was the tranquility of it all. Time didn't seem the same. It wasn't rushed or slow, it simply existed. It was peaceful. Jim said, it wasn't scary, it wasn't painful. It was like I was being shown something bigger than myself. His life, as Jim returned to his body, the peace he had felt moments before, was replaced by sharp, painful reality. He was cold, exhausted, feeling pain, and facing challenges that seemed insurmountable. Jim knew he needed to keep going, even when everything seemed to be falling apart around him. Years later, during a near-death experience, he shared something that might surprise many people. Jim recalled Jesus' words recorded in the Gospel, "I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." These words, at first glance, might seem contradictory. Why would Jesus, known as the Prince of Peace, mention a sword? Was he promoting conflict? This question echoes in many hearts, but for Jim, the answer became clear amid his experiences. He explained that Jesus was speaking of a call to make difficult choices, an invitation to cut away what separates us from God, even if it means deep divisions in our lives. Jim reflected on the generational sins that often plague families, the patterns of pain, hurt, and separation that repeat from generation to generation. These burdens can hold us back, hindering our spiritual journey and affecting our closest relationships. However, Jim emphasized that the sword Jesus spoke of was not a weapon of destruction, but a symbol of transformation. It was about separating what is holy from what is harmful, what is eternal from what is fleeting. For Jim, these words of Jesus were not just a theological lesson, but something deeply personal. He recalled how Jesus spoke about who our true brothers and sisters are. "For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister," Jim said, quoting the scriptures. He highlighted that following God is not always easy. Sometimes it means letting go of people and things we once considered essential. Throughout his life, Jim experienced this truth concretely. After playing Jesus in a film that marked his career, he faced challenges that tested his faith and determination. He went through intense personal trials, faced professional rejection, and fought spiritual battles that led him to question his own path. Many people around him doubted his choices and even mocked his faith. Despite this, Jim remained firm, believing that obeying God was more important than seeking the approval of others. "It's not easy," Jim admitted honestly. "Jesus never said it would be easy, but he promised it would be worth it." This promise became a foundation for him, especially during the darkest moments of his life. Jim explained that the sword mentioned by Jesus symbolizes the need to cut ties with everything that distances us from God. This includes selfish ambitions, material attachments, and even relationships that, though precious, may prevent us from fully following the divine will. He talked about how we often cling to things or people, believing we cannot live without them, only to discover that our true peace and fulfillment are in God. This understanding became even more evident for Jim as he reflected on his near-death experience. He described the peace he felt at that moment as something completely different from anything the world could offer. It was not related to success, material comfort, or even the love of the people around him. It was a peace that transcended all earthly circumstances, a peace rooted in the presence of God. Jim concluded by saying that, although the path of following God is full of challenges, it is also full of purpose. The sword Jesus spoke of is a tool of purification, not of destruction. It is an opportunity to cut the chains that bind us to what is temporary and open ourselves to what is eternal. One love, a love so powerful that it crosses all barriers, Jim said. When you truly find God, you realize that nothing else matters. Not the pain, not the rejection, not even death. All that matters is Him. This revelation was what gave Jim the strength to continue his mission, even when the road became difficult. For him, his role in the Passion of the Christ was not just acting. It was a calling, a way to share the gospel with the world. Jim's story reminds us that following Jesus is a choice that often comes with sacrifices, but one that leads to peace, love, and eternal life. After everything Jim faced, on the cross during filming, in his near-death experience, and in the challenges that came after, he emerged with a clear message. A message rooted in God's love, sacrifice, and peace. He reflected on Jesus' last commandment, to love. Jesus asks us to love, even when it's difficult, Jim said. That's why I obey Him. For Him, loving like Jesus is not just being kind or forgiving, but being obedient. He explained that this call to love often requires us to leave behind things we think are indispensable, our pride, our grudges, and even our comfort. Jim's journey, both on the cross and off it, reminds us that love is more than a feeling. It is a choice to forgive, to obey, and to trust in God's plan. And it is through this choice that we find peace, the same peace Jim described, the peace Jesus promised. Jim's story is a testament to the power of faith and God's love. It is a reminder that no matter how difficult the journey may be, there is hope, peace, and love waiting for us, if we are willing to choose them. But for the cast and crew of the Passion of the Christ, the journey was not easy. Mel Gibson faced severe criticism, and Jim suffered physical and spiritual attacks. Lightning strikes, injuries, and even moments of doubt weighed on them. Despite this, they persevered, believing that the message was greater than any sacrifice. The Passion of the Christ was not just a movie. It was a movement. It reminded the world of the power of Christ's sacrifice and inspired countless people to deepen their faith. For Jim and Mel, this was a journey of faith, sacrifice, and resilience. Their stories are a powerful reminder that following Christ is not always easy, but it is always worth it. And you? Would you have the courage to take on a role like Jim's? To stand firm in your faith no matter the cost? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge your faith. Remember, the story of Christ is not just history, it is the greatest story ever told.